Have you ever wondered why professional swimmers shave their legs? Or why tennis players take advantage of topspin and backspin? Or have you ever wondered why cyclists cycle in a streamline behind each other rather than individually or separately? Well, if you've ever had any of these questions, then stay tuned because today we're talking all things biomechanics and sport. So to start with, what actually is biomechanics? Biomechanics is the study of motion and the effects of forces relative to the body. So what is a force? A force is the push or pull of an object with mass changing its velocity or direction. This can occur outside the body or inside the body. Forces can do a few things. The first thing a force can do is get an object moving. They can also stop objects moving. They can change the direction of that object. They can change the speed that the object is moving, and they can balance and unbalance other forces or objects. Moving on to the coefficient of restitution. This measures the elasticity of a collision between an object and a given surface. So for example, a basketball is more bouncy than a hockey ball. That is because a basketball's coefficient of restitution is higher than a hockey ball's, which means that it can conserve more energy to allow it to bounce higher for longer. There are a few factors that affect the coefficient of restitution. The first is temperature, equipment and surfaces, and the velocity. Now we are moving on to the moment of inertia. This is the distribution of mass about the point of rotation. It is found by multiplying the mass by the radius of rotation, so it's an angular measure. Angular velocity measures how fast an object is rotating. So that could include rotating around bars, or for examples include tennis. Conservation of angular momentum means that a spinning object will continue to spin indefinitely unless an external force is applied. Now we are moving on to summation of forces is a process that determines how best to use the body, depending on the demands of the task. Is the demand power related or is it accuracy related? If it is power, the task requires more segments. So therefore the force is usually sequentially summated, meaning that the task is done in sequential parts. For example, a pitch in softball. To create that force required to get the ball all the way to the batter, often the pitcher will start with their lower body segments or their bigger, stronger compounds. So go from their legs to their hips, to their back, to their shoulder, and then to their arm, and then to the wrist, elbow, and then wrist, and flick the ball. So to generate enough power to pitch at their best ability, pitchers will use a sequential movement. So certain movement that happens over time to generate the most power. Now this is compared to movements that require more accuracy over power. And they're usually summated simultaneously, which means all at once. So for example, in a netball shot where you're right next to the hoop or under the hoop, you require more accuracy to get it in the hoop rather than more force. A netballer will bend their knees, bend their elbows, and then release all at the same time rather than generating more force over a longer period of time. So we have sequential and simultaneous movements or summations of forces. So this is why when kicking a soccer ball or going for a bat, you take longer to generate more power than you would when going for a dart throw or netball shot or doing something that requires less power and more accuracy. And finally, we are moving on to fluid mechanics. So why do swimmers wear particular bathers or shave their legs, and why do cyclists stay in close-knit groups than cycling individually? Well, this is all to do with something called drag. So the first type of drag is form drag. Form drag is the resistance created by the pressure differential between the front and the back of an object. So that is to do with cyclists and their helmets, for example. A lot of professional cyclists will have a helmet that curves, that narrows down towards the back. That is to take advantage of the drag and reduce the difference between the front and the back. Surface drag is the second type of drag, and that is the friction produced between the fluid and the surface of a moving object. For example, this is why swimmers shave their legs and wear particular bathing suits to reduce the amount of drag while they're swimming. Thirdly, wave drag is the resistance formed by the creation of waves at the point where air and water interact. Now, do you know why swimming pools have lanes in them? This is to reduce the amount of wave drag in a swimming pool. So they are placed there to reduce the wave drag that occurs when swimmers are racing. And now this is why no one ever competes on the end lanes in a swimming pool, because there's no lanes and the drag increases because it just hits the wall. So they would be significantly disadvantaged. And this is also why the more faster swimmers swim in the middle of the pool, because they experience the least amount of drag because they only have themselves compared to the outside lanes who experience drag from the left and the right. Now we move on to Bernoulli's principle. Bernoulli's principle explains how lift occurs in certain objects. So when you create a pressure differential, an object is able to move. So it affects the shape and the pressure of an object. So for example, in a frisbee, there is more pressure underneath the frisbee compared to above, so that's why it floats up. Then we move on to the Magnus Effect, which is a term to describe the effect of rotation on an object path as it moves through a fluid. There are multiple ways that you can see the Magnus Effect occurring. This is through topspin and backspin and no spin. This is seen through the different types of spin that can be applied to a ball. The first is topspin, which is created by an eccentric force, which is an off-centered force applied to produce angular as well as linear motion. So this can be seen in a volleyball serve or a tennis serve. Say this is the ball. The force is applied on top of the ball to create the spin going forward, so the ball travels faster and stays in the air for shorter. So it's a fast, low serve. On the other hand, we have something called backspin. Now this is when the eccentric force is applied, but underneath, the contact is made underneath the ball instead of on top. So the contact is made here. The ball travels backwards, slowing down the motion and lifting it up in the air. So this is when you see certain players in tennis do it quite close to the net. They chop underneath the ball, which allows the ball to go slowly over the net. And finally, we have something called side spin. Now this is when the contact is made on the side of the ball and causes the ball to curve left or right. Now a very good example of this is seen in soccer when they go for goals. Bend it like Beckham. Does that ring any bells? Well, I'm going to explain to you what that actually means. Bend it like Beckham relates to the Magnus Effect and something called side spin. So when a force is applied eccentrically on the side of a ball, like a soccer ball, it allows the ball to spin a particular way and then curve the other way. And that all relates to biomechanics. So that was biomechanics for Year 12 ATAR PE study students, or anyone interested in all those concepts that was just explained. I hope that made sense and I hope you learned something new.